Hey there, YouTube. Ever since I got involved in blacksmithing, I've developed an appreciation for tools that have an antiquity value to them. Tools that were powered mostly by man or animals before electricity and steam became very popular. Um, so I've been making kind of a conscious effort to kind of go out there, look in the antique stores, surf the net and see what I can find so that eventually, someday when I have my own shop, I can use these tools and practice as closely as I can the traditional techniques that smiths would use to make their tools and their items and whatnot for their customers. So I've got a couple items here that I've purchased recently or have found that I think are really neat. So I'm going to go ahead and show these to you. First up is this. I went to go visit my grandfather one day, and working with metal actually runs in the family. My great-grandfather was one heck of an artist, blacksmith and jewelry maker. He has made he's made bronze castings. We have a bronze chandelier back at home at my parents' place that he made. Beautiful piece of work. He's made animals. He's made um, jars and whatnot. And I hope one day that maybe I can even come close to the skill that he had. But this is a tool that he used. This is a hot punch used in blacksmithing. This was used to make holes. You would just heat up your metal, and you would force this through one end of the metal, turn your metal over, and when you would see a dark spot forming on your hot metal from the tip cooling it off, you would punch that through your pitchel hole, and then you would have a small hole in your metal. And you could do anything with that you want, put rivets through it and whatnot. But this was his hot punch, and there's actually some markings on here that say Old Forge USA. So I'm assuming he bought this from some sort of factory or tool shop, which is actually kind of surprising to me. The mentality from my side of the family, my mom, was that make the tool yourself, so that way you know you made it right, and then you can save some cash. So why he bought this, I don't know, but he did. There you go. Now, the next piece I want to show you is also something that was once my great-grandfather's. It's a pair of blacksmithing tongs. Now, the neat thing about these is that modern tongs, since a lot of people have power hammers, is there sometimes and usually one solid piece of metal. Each have these tongs here is one piece of metal hammered out to whatever shape you need. Traditionally, what smiths would do is they would make this front end here first, this part of the jaws and up to about here, and they would make this out of a heavier rectangular stock. This way they could have large jaws, and then they would forge weld on the reins here. Otherwise they would have to draw this large bar out all the way down here to this small round diameter. And if it was just you by yourself or you an apprentice, that's still a lot of work. So by making this forge weld here, they would save a lot of time. So if you look here, you can actually see where the scarf is, where the forge weld was made, highlighted by the black arrow. Now this is a nice pair of tongs as well. It's nice, heavy, beefy. It's just big enough to handle larger stock, and it's just small enough to handle small stock. These jaws here you can use for either flat stock, small square stock, and there's actually indentation here when these were made to handle round stock. Now there's no markings on here, and again, knowing the mentality of my family, he probably made this himself. So I think it's really neat to have a fourth generation tool that was actually probably made by my great grandfather. So this is probably one of my most prized possessions right now. This next piece I got at an antique store in a small town, and when I first saw this, I wasn't really sure what this was. I had a couple ideas, and my big hope was that it was some sort of twisting wrench used by blacksmiths, that they would put their square stock into these holes here, clamp it down, and then twist it. I wasn't sure though, so I went on to the UMBA board, the Upper Midwest Blacksmithing Association message board, and put a picture of this and asked if anyone had seen this before. And I did get a reply, and unfortunately it wasn't what I was hoping it was. It was actually the first thing that came to mind. This is a wrench for an old tap and die set. So your taps would have a square end, and you would put your end in here, clamp it down, and then twist it and tap your hole. One kind of neat thing about this is that these different taps here, or I guess you would call them clamps for your tap, have numbers on them. Apparently these numbers were an indication of how many times you could turn that tap before you would bottom out, I'm assuming, on a hole, if it was the blind hole you were tapping was the length of your tap. There's also a couple of other markings on here. Ever since I painted this, I can't see them too well, especially in this light. I do know that there is one marking on here that's kind of strange. It says McKinnon on it. MACKINNON. And the lettering is in a different style and shape of the manufacturer's name on this tool. So what I'm guessing is that that was the name of the owner who owned this at one point in time. So something kind of neat. And one other interesting about this tool is most tap wrenches nowadays are kind of a universal size. This one, however, is different. What you can do is you can unscrew the handle here, and these all move individually. And this is one reason why I had to restore this and soak it in vinegar. All these parts here had frozen up, and none of them moved anymore. So I soaked them in a vinegar tub for a while, and then after a couple of days, they unfroze, and now I can move them. And what this wrench can do is that, you see this little slot here, is these actually will pop out, and then you can put different pieces in. This was kind of like a universal wrench. So again, just something kind of neat that I like. I painted this with a high temperature paint, because I'm probably going to use this as a twisting wrench one day. Here's a photo I took of the wrench before I soaked it in vinegar and removed all the rust. And as you can see, the name J. Maxing and Company, Waterford, New York, is stamped here on the wrench. All right. And last, and certainly not least, it's my most recent and my absolute favorite tool that I have found. This here is an old hand-powered grinding wheel. Now, I don't have a stone for this. I didn't have one at the antique store, so I just put this kind of CD on here just as a visual aid to give you the general idea of how this would work. Now, originally, when smiths would use, they had to use air, obviously, to heat up their coal, to heat up their fire, is they would just use those large billows. Now, the problem with this is it was very inefficient. It took a lot of energy just to get a little bit of airflow. Eventually, what someone discovered is how to use gears and different sized gears to increase the efficiency of the energy you're putting in to power your forge. And what they made were forge blowers, and they work under the same concept of this. Put a small gear or a large gear down here by your hand crank, and a small gear up here by your fan, or in this case, grinding wheel. And the more you turn this handle, the more revolutions you get up here. For example, if I were to take this handle here and move it from here to about there, that's one full turn up here on the grinding wheel. Just that small amount from there to there. That's one complete turn. The increase of efficiency for tools like this was an amazing feat and discovery of technology at the time. This increased, the forge blowers, hand-powered equipment like this, and it made people realize that using creativity like this, using this mentality of letting technology do the work for you, is what led to things like, the cotton gin and the Industrial Revolution. So this, while it might seem extremely crude and simple nowadays, was a huge technological revolution of the days, back in the day. So I'm going to go ahead and crank this guy up and kind of give you an idea of what it looks like. This little CD on here really does not do this thing justice how fast you can go once you really get it going. So I'll go off kind of slow here at first. You know, that speed in of itself is, this wheel's moving pretty darn fast. So I'm going to kind of really let it go fast, and you can kind of see how fast the thing can go. And that takes almost no effort at all. Doesn't really tire me out much. And for a blacksmith who was hammering all day, he could crank on a wheel like that for probably half an hour and he wouldn't even feel it. So I love this piece here. A lot of these other hand cranks using the same kind of large gear, small gear technology, it's all enclosed in a box, you know, so you don't have these pinch points. But to me, visually, to be able to see how this works is really neat. And there's a couple of markings on here as well. Right here on this main gear, it says Empire, E-M-P-I-R-E, implant, I believe, but it's I-M-P-L-N apostrophe T, Albany, New York. On the other side, there's a patent number and the date 25 September of 1900. Now I'm assuming this was probably made sometime around the patent date. So to have a functioning piece of equipment that's probably over 100 years old, to me, is just phenomenal. To be able to set this up in my shop one day and use this is, I think, really neat. Well, yeah, that about does it. Hope you guys enjoyed this vid. If you have any information about some of these other tools, you know, it'd be great to hear about it. Feel free to comment down below.